So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Benjamin Pachter. I am the Executive Director of the Japan American Society of Central Ohio. I am also Assistant Director of Dublin Taiko, which is a 6 through 12 Taiko group in the Dublin City Schools. I am also a member of the Board of Directors of the Taiko Community Alliance. That is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to help supporting Taiko performance in North America and beyond. So I'm going to be talking about Taiko. So Taiko is a Japanese word for drum. So it's just a drum. There are different types of Taiko. We'll talk about that a little bit, but about my background, so I gave you my titles. I've only been playing Taiko for 12 years. I say only been playing Taiko for 12 years because my teacher, one of my teachers has been playing for 50 and another one of them has been playing for 45. So in the grand scheme of things, I've only been playing Taiko for 12 years. My background is as a orchestral musician. My bachelor's and first master's are actually in orchestral percussion performance. Then I transitioned into that and started learning how to play Taiko after getting my first master's. So I got my PhD in ethnomusicology, that is a study of non-Western music, and my specialty is Taiko performance. So I wrote my PhD on Taiko, and that kind of, so I learned Taiko as I was studying about Taiko, if that makes sense. Then I transitioned out of academia into nonprofit work, which is where I make my money. But I volunteer as a board member with TCA, as well as 10 hours a week working with Dublin Taiko. So that's a lot of time that could be spent somewhere else. So it keeps me quite busy. I actually started learning here in Ohio. So whenever I started learning, my first lesson official lesson that I took like on a regular basis was in January of 2009 in Cleveland, Ohio with Icho Daiko, which is a group that is no longer around, even though Yume Daiko, their successor, which is one of the ones that happened after they split, is still around. But I did a majority of my training in Hawaii at the Taiko Center of the Pacific with a Taiko performer named Kenny Endo. So if any of you is looking like to spend a fun summer somewhere and learn how to play Taiko, Taiko Center Pacific is something I very highly recommend. I've also done lessons in Japan and so forth. So I play a bunch of different styles. But what I do right now is play primarily with Dublin Taiko, so that's me on the left-hand side. What I'm wearing today is just a normal hoppy. I'll explain in a second. I didn't necessarily want to wear my Dublin Taiko uniform because one, it's sleeveless, and that's not the best thing to be wearing in January. And this is also a lot easier to move around. So basically speaking, talking about the construction of Taiko, there's two types. And they are related to how the head is attached to and tightened on the drum. Number one is tack-tied like this. And I'll explain how I can actually do this in a second. You can actually see how there are black things on each side of the head. Those are tacks that are actually attaching the head to the drum. The other type is a rope-tied drum, where a skin is tightened around a ring, and then a rope is used to tighten that head. And within that, there are many different types of drums, but those are the two primary construction. Now, the fact that I was able to lift this drum over my head is very rare. Historically speaking, in Japan, drums are solid body, historically made out of hinoki, which is a form of Japanese cypress, and they get to be very big drums. Historically speaking, this is still what happens today, is you will fell a drum, a tree that is, its trunk is probably 15, 20 feet in diameter, and then you will cut it into different large lengths, and it will stay in a warehouse and dry for 5 to 15 years. Once it is dried to a certain point, then they will start coring it. So you will extract a certain point of coring, living in your ring, that gives you the largest drum. You do that again, you get a slightly smaller drum. You keep doing until you get the smaller drums that are about that much in diameter. These things are heavy. Even as say a 20-inch diameter solid body drum could weigh 50 pounds plus. But in the 20th century, what started to happen is you started to be able to get drums that are made in stave format. So it's actually constructed very similar to a wine barrel. Hence, I can lift this drum over my head. This drum is out of beechwood. There's also drums, so you'll find a lot of them made out of oak. So in the United States especially, you'll find people who have converted old wine barrels or old whiskey barrels into Taiko. Same basic construction, so you are tightening what's typically cow skin over a drum to the point that in the initial construction stages, you will actually be able to jump on that head and it will not break. But the flip side is that this drum costs only $700. The equivalent size drum in Japan would start around $2,000 and just goes up from there. So, for example, that middle drum that Eitan-san is playing, if we've got it in Japan, I believe it's a $4,000 drum. And that's not even a solid body, that's actually a stage style drum as well. These things can be expensive, like do you want a car or do you want a drum? The largest, and they can go up to, I mean, again, the size of cars. So those things will be hundreds of thousands of dollars accordingly because of everything that goes into it. Now, you will hear somebody inevitably tell you, say, if you go to see a taiko performance with a bunch of people on stage, taiko is a traditional art form, it's been played this way for centuries. That is not necessarily a lie, but it's not necessarily a truth either. There are historical usages of taiko and contemporary usages of taiko. Taiko is one of the oldest instruments in Japan. Well, I actually had a wonderful presentation about this just 2 hours ago. It is believed that taiko are the only instruments to speak to the gods. They are actually one of the first instruments that are mentioned in Japanese historical myth. Going around to the Amaterasu thing with Amaterasu hiding herself away and they dance on top of a drum to bring her out. So for that reason, taiko are historically sacred objects. So they are often used in court music and religious festival music. And also for religious rite as well. They're also used in theatrical music. The type of instruments that will be used will vary, but inevitably it's going to be either a tack drum or a rope drum. The interesting thing is, even within this context, there is development. There are ways of playing taiko that are the same way as it was maybe 1,000 years ago, but you're also having evolution. Tradition does not necessarily mean it's static. Traditions are always changing. There's different things that happen. So if you go to the next slide, we're actually going to show a really good example of this. So one of the ways that taiko is played, you'll notice whenever you get to come up and try this, I have this on a slanted stand. This is a festival drumming style from Tokyo that takes place during Obon. Obon, for those who are not aware, is a festival that takes place in late summer. It's believed to be the time whenever one's ancestors return to this realm. There are different ways of playing bondaiko depending where you are in Japan. So what I'm doing right now, this stand itself signifies that it's from Tokyo. There's not one single way to play taiko. You go to different places in Japan, you'll have different taiko of different sizes being played with different sticks in different ways. It's just a drum like anything else. It's like anything around the world. But what's really interesting about this style, it kind of shows how things can evolve. So I'm going to accompany once a part of Tokyo Ondo, which is a song that's played during Obon, and I'm going to play like basic stuff. So if you want to press the right button, please.
Yeah.
What happened?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you hit something?
Sorry.
Okay, don't touch it. It totally is how you can accompany that song. Taiko historically are accompanying instruments. They are not solo instruments. If you see a drum by itself, it's maybe in a shrine or a temple. It is accompanying some religious rite, but it's not necessarily a solo instrument. So it needs to be functional. But that doesn't mean that you can't have some fun with it. So same song, different accompaniment. same rhythms, different way of playing. What you started to see in the 20th century with this specific style is it got a lot more theatrical, is one way to put it. Just became a lot more interesting to look at. What started, and simply because if you have this instrument, you have a bunch of drunk people playing it. Typically in Tokyo, this drum will actually be on the top of a yakura. So a large tower above which everyone are dancing as they do this. So you get drunk people at the center of attention. And what actually started happening in Tokyo is they started to have competitions for this, and that starts to breed a different element of creativity. And that inevitably leads to what we now call, what I call contemporary taiko performance. So what you see whenever you see a bunch of drums on stage is a completely World War II post-World War II development. You get a bunch of guys who want drums to be the center of attention, so let's make it the center of attention. Now, it's a lot more complex than that, but if you actually boil down to almost every single story about how contemporary taiko performance started, that's what it comes down to. Why can't drums be at the center of tempo? It's a very drummer perspective on things. This is coming from a drummer. It's not a bad thing. But where it gets complicated is that it's not necessarily new, but it's not necessarily old. So like this style of drumming has been around for a while. These drums are really, really old. This stand is fairly recent, maybe say 60s or before, but it's kind of old. But you put it on stage, you start screwing around with theatricality a little bit, you start arranging it for a stage performance, then you create this new performance style. So if you go to see a taiko group, they're doing a fun mixture of stuff, new and old. They've probably studied both. If they are a taiko group that are worth their value at all, they can play both traditionally and contemporary. I'll admit I don't. That's why one of the reasons I say I only play for 12 years, because there's stuff that I have not studied. I can play certain traditional styles, but not all of them incredibly well. And I'm trying to recall if I yeah. So, practically speaking, if you wanted to play taiko, how can I play taiko? There are a few options. Number one is there actually are a growing number of online websites that will teach you how to play taiko. Now, it assumes that you have a drum or something like a drum that you can kind of figure out the fundamentals, because taiko is a very physical instrument. It's a drum. You need something to be able to hit. But Kodon.com is probably the primary resource right now. But what I often recommend is doing it in person. Luckily, here in Ohio, there are a growing number of places where you can do that. In Central Ohio, despite the fact that we have a number, with Dublin Taiko, the group that I teach, it's the largest taiko group of its size in the United States. We have over 100 people in the group right now, but they're all 6th grade and up Dublin City schools, so normal people can't do it. We have access to a lot of drums, and we would love to be able to figure out how to get community members to get involved, and we just can't figure it out yet. Because we work within Dublin City schools, there are restrictions that come at it. However, in Cleveland, there's Yume Daiko. In Bowling Green, there is a Kazuno Daichi taiko group. There's a group, a school that just opened up within the last month in Dayton. There is a group in Seattle, in Cincinnati. So there are places where you can learn there are community groups where you can learn how to play taiko across the United States. If you are in a major city in the United States, chances are there are a taiko group, or is a taiko group, or are multiple taiko groups. And that's really the best way to do it, because this is a big instrument. It's very hard to practice taiko at home, trust me. I actually have a tire that I've poured into a taiko. Luckily, the internet has also made it very easy to purchase taiko. There are now 2 different Japanese taiko manufacturers have stores on the West Coast that have online stores that allow you to purchase taiko. Warning, it is not cheap. It is not a cheap hobby. Bachi like this alone start at $30, but I have right now in my bag 10 plus pairs of bachi. Taiko, if you're buying from either of these companies, start from about $2,000, $3,000 for a small drum. There are American manufacturers who make stave style like this, where they'll start more around $1,000. So it's not an inexpensive hobby, but it is a fun one. It's a workout, too. One of the images you may have in your mind before I move on, because I'm out of time, is a guy in a loincloth, maybe playing a large taiko, who looks incredibly, incredibly fit. That's typically a member of the group Ondekoza or Kodo, who are notorious for their training methods, where they will run marathons every day practically. They'll run 5 to 10K in the morning, practice all day, run 5 to 10K at night. So you think about the fitness level that is required to do that, and I can attest that if I don't run 3 days a week and I try to play taiko, like Mondays and Tuesdays for what we do, I'm dead. Because it is a physically intensive activity. Don't necessarily need to do any of that work, but it's part of the performance practice that we play. So it is a good workout. So before we move on to more interesting and less bombastic and over-the-top instruments, are there any questions?